Remember when certain careers practically guaranteed you'd become one of the wealthiest people in your neighborhood? When just mentioning your job title at a dinner party would make heads turn with genuine respect and maybe a little envy? The 1970s had jobs that paid like royalty, but today barely cover rent in a studio apartment. And if you held one of these positions back then, you were living a completely different version of the American dream than what exists now. We're taking you back through 25 careers that defined middle-class prosperity in the 70s. Jobs where you could afford a house, 2 cars, annual vacations, and still have money left over for savings. These weren't lottery winners or trust fund recipients. These were your neighbors, the parents of kids you grew up with, people who clocked in and out, but somehow managed to build empires on salaries that today would make you laugh, then cry, then probably look for a second income stream. You walk into a travel agency in 1975, and you're entering a portal where someone behind that desk holds the keys to your dream vacation. The travel agent was pulling in what would be $70,000 or $80,000 in today's money, sometimes more with corporate travel. They had massive binders filled with hotel catalogs, airline schedules printed on thin paper that smelled like ink and possibility. You'd tell them you wanted Hawaii, and they'd spend an hour building an itinerary by hand, calling hotels on rotary phones, negotiating rates, booking flights through systems that were basically card catalogs. They knew which airlines had the widest seats, which hotels just renovated, which islands had the best luau's. This was specialized knowledge you couldn't get anywhere else because there was no internet, no Expedia, no way to comparison shop from your couch. They charged healthy commissions, 10%, sometimes 15% on international trips. Today, the average travel agent makes $38,000, working from home, competing with algorithms that book your entire trip in 4 minutes. Do you remember the last time you actually walked into a travel agency? You're a telephone operator in 1972, sitting at a massive switchboard that stretches 8 feet wide, a wall of holes and cables and blinking lights. Your fingers move with practiced precision, plugging cables into jacks, connecting caller to recipient, saying "number please" hundreds of times per shift. This required weeks of training, quick thinking, perfect diction, handling 12 conversations simultaneously. Operators made what translates to $55,000 to $60,000 today, with full benefits, pension plans, and the social prestige of working for Ma Bell. You wore a headset for 8 hours, but you were part of the infrastructure that kept America connected. Every long-distance call, every business deal, every emergency, it went through you. The switchboard smelled like warm electronics and coffee. The room hummed with conversations, and you knew you were doing something essential. Today's telephone operators make about $32,000 if they can even find work, because automated systems replaced most of them. When was the last time you heard a real human voice say, "How may I direct your call?" You're a typist in a corporate office pool in 1974, one of 20 women at identical desks with IBM Selectric typewriters, each making what amounts to $48,000 in modern currency. The sound was like rainfall on a tin roof, constant clacking, the ding of carriage returns, the zip of paper being changed. You typed 70 words per minute with 0 errors, because mistakes meant starting over or using correction fluid that left visible marks. Executives wrote longhand on legal pads, sent it to the typing pool where you transformed their scrawled notes into perfect correspondence. You weren't just typing, you were translating handwriting, correcting grammar, formatting documents, sometimes rewriting sections to make them coherent. You knew company secrets because you typed every confidential memo. The job required intense concentration and fingers that could fly across keys for hours. Today's data entry clerks make $29,000, and most jobs have been outsourced or replaced by speech-to-text software and executives who type their own emails. Do you remember the sound of a typewriter? That mechanical symphony that used to mean real work? You're a factory worker at a GM plant in Detroit in 1976, and you're thriving. Your paycheck translates to $75,000 today. You've got full health care for almost nothing, a pension guaranteeing you can retire at 55 with dignity, and enough vacation time to take your family to a lake house every summer. You install transmissions, the same motion every 90 seconds, and yes, it's repetitive, but it's also a craft you've perfected. You know exactly how much torque each bolt needs, can hear when something's misaligned before it becomes a problem. The factory smells like motor oil and hot metal, sounds so loud you read lips more than hear words. Your union fought for your wages, your benefits, your dignity. You buy American, a new Chevy every 4 years, appliances that last decades, a house where everyone else works at the plant too. Today's factory worker makes about $34,000, often with no benefits, no union, no pension, and most plants moved to Mexico or China or got replaced by robots. Can you still hear that factory sound that used to mean prosperity was being built? You're a bank teller in 1973, standing behind marble counters in a building that feels like a temple, making the equivalent of $52,000 today. This wasn't a temporary gig. This was a real career. You knew every customer by name, remembered their kids' birthdays, advised them on savings accounts, helped them understand mortgages for their first house. You counted cash by hand, your fingers moving through bills with practiced speed, always twice to verify, recording everything in ledgers with fountain pens. Banks closed at 3, but you stayed until 5 reconciling your drawer, because being off by even a dollar meant staying until you found the error. The job came with respect. Bank employees were pillars of the community, trusted with life savings. You had a clear path, teller to head teller to personal banking to branch manager. Today's bank teller averages $31,000, and banks are actively eliminating the position, pushing customers toward ATMs and mobile apps. When did you last actually speak to a teller instead of feeding your check into a machine? You're a stenographer in a courtroom in 1977, fingers dancing across a specialized machine at 225 words per minute, making what translates to 68,000 today. You're not just recording words, you're preserving justice, creating the official record that appeals will be based on. That becomes the permanent historical document. You mark exhibits, note timestamps, identify speakers by voice. You sit through murder trials, divorces, corporate litigation, civil rights cases, your face betraying nothing, your fingers capturing everything. The machine feeds paper tape covered in symbols only you can read, which you'll transcribe into proper English later. You transcribe on weekends for extra money, depositions, city council meetings, sometimes, doubling your income. Today's court reporters make about $60,000, which sounds comparable until you factor in inflation, and courts increasingly rely on digital audio recording transcribed overseas or by AI that makes embarrassing errors. Do you think a recording captures courtroom tension the way a person present could? You're a skilled machinist in 1976. Working in a shop that smells like cutting oil and hot metal shavings, operating lathes and mills that require years of apprenticeship to master. You're making $71,000 in today's dollars, with overtime pushing you into 6 figures if you work Saturdays. Your hands are permanently stained with oil that never washes out completely. You own your own tools, precision instruments costing thousands of dollars that you guard jealously. You measure in thousandths of an inch using micrometers and calipers, because being off by 2/1000ths means the entire piece is scrap. The machines are manual, requiring constant attention, your hands on wheels and levers, your eyes watching the cutting tool bite into metal, listening because experienced machinists hear problems before seeing them. You make parts for aerospace, automotive transmissions, oil drilling equipment, medical devices. Your union negotiated your wages. Healthcare is completely covered. Your pension grows with every year. Today's machinist makes about $45,000, and the profession is dying because kids are told to go to college instead of learning trades, because manufacturing moved overseas, because CNC machines replaced much of the work requiring human judgment. When did you last meet someone under 30 who knew how to operate a lathe? You're a telephone line installer for Bell System in 1977, climbing wooden poles 40 feet in the air while kids stopped their bikes to watch. You're making $69,000 in today's money. You wore a leather tool belt heavy with equipment, climbing spikes strapped to your boots biting into wood with each step upward, a safety belt you trusted with your life. The job was technical precision, splicing cables with dozens of individual wires, color-coded pairs that had to be connected exactly right, or entire blocks would lose service. You worked in teams, pulling cable through conduits, boring holes through walls, installing junction boxes, testing connections. Summer days, the tar on poles stuck to your clothes. Winter days, your fingers went numb handling tiny wires. But the work was steady, union-protected, respected. Bell System invested in you. Paid training, automatic raises, comprehensive benefits, a pension for life after 30 years. You had job security that's unimaginable today because the phone company was a regulated monopoly that couldn't just lay people off. Today's telecommunications installer makes about $39,000, usually as a contractor providing their own vehicle and tools, racing to complete quotas with no time for quality work. When was the last time an installer spent more than 20 minutes at your house? You're a print journalist in 1978, working in a newsroom exactly like the movies. Desks covered in paper, typewriters clacking, editors yelling, the smell of cigarette smoke and burnt coffee, phones ringing constantly. You're pulling in $72,000 today's dollars, plus a pension, plus bylines that mean something. You spend days on a single story, interviewing dozens of sources, reviewing public records, phones, making calls from phone booths. You write longhand first, then type it up. Turn it into your editor who actually edits, cuts, rearranges, challenges your facts, makes you rewrite until it's bulletproof. Your stories run with your name on them, sometimes front page above the fold. You have specializations: city politics, crime, business, sports, and you become the expert, the person politicians and police chiefs have to answer to. The paper employs 100 journalists plus photographers, copy editors, fact checkers, researchers. Today's print journalist makes about $48,000, works for newspapers with a tenth of the staff, covers multiple beats because there's nobody else, publishes online where nobody reads past headlines, and supplements income with freelance work. When did you last buy a physical newspaper? And did you feel guilty knowing what happened to those jobs? You're a real estate agent in 1974. Driving clients around in your personal Cadillac you write off as business expense, making commissions translating to $85,000 yearly. The job was different. Fewer agents competing for listings, less regulation, higher commission percentages sellers accepted as standard. You bought a multiple listing book weekly, thick as a phone book, filled with grainy photos of available properties. You memorized inventory, drove by houses to preview them yourself, built relationships with sellers by knocking on doors. Showing houses meant unlocking a lockbox or meeting owners who'd leave while you gave the tour, pointing out features, telling neighborhood stories, painting pictures of what life could be like. You closed deals over handshakes, financed through local banks where you knew loan officers personally. You were a trusted advisor who knew the community because you'd lived there your whole life. Today's real estate agent averages $41,000 yearly, and that's before paying for licensing, continuing education, MLS fees, marketing costs, brokerage splits, and self-employment taxes. The market is oversaturated with agents competing for compressed commissions. Have you noticed how many Facebook friends are real estate agents now? You're a camera repair technician in 1974, working downtown where serious photographers brought equipment, disassembling precision mechanical devices that cost as much as cars. You're earning $59,000 in today's money, working at a bench covered with tiny screws and springs and gears, tools so specialized most people wouldn't recognize them. You used jeweler's loops to examine mechanisms, tweezers to position components smaller than rice grains. Cameras then were entirely mechanical, clockwork shutters controlled by springs and gears, manual focus rings on helical threads, aperture blades opening and closing with perfect precision. You diagnosed problems by feel and sound. A dragging shutter indicated worn lubricant. A catching focus ring meant dirt in the threads. You worked on Leicas, Nikons, Hasselblads that professional photographers depended on for their livelihoods. Repairs took days or weeks because you didn't cut corners. You disassembled completely, cleaned every part, replaced worn components, recalibrated to factory specifications. The shop smelled like camera grease and optical cleaning fluid. Today's camera repair technician makes about $41,000 if you can find one at all, because most cameras aren't worth repairing. They're electronic devices designed to be replaced. Labor costs exceed buying new. Manufacturers don't provide parts or service documentation to independent repair shops. Do you even know where you'd take a broken camera for repair? You're a department store buyer in 1977, traveling to New York twice yearly to meet manufacturers and designers, selecting inventory for your store. You're earning $79,000 today's dollars, plus travel expenses, plus bonuses based on how well your selections sell. You had your own an office, a title that commanded respect, senior buyer, women's sportswear, and authority to make purchasing decisions worth hundreds of thousands based on your judgment. You attended fashion shows, walked Manhattan's garment district showrooms, negotiated prices and delivery directly with manufacturers. You understood your customers intimately, knew your city preferred certain colors, that climate required different weight fabrics than coastal stores, that your demographic wouldn't pay for certain brands but would spend on others. You tracked sales from paper reports, visited the floor daily to observe what moved and what didn't. Your decisions made or broke entire product lines. Today's retail buyer makes about $56,000 if the position still exists after chains centralized buying at corporate headquarters, with far less autonomy, following data-driven algorithms and corporate mandates rather than trusting judgment about local markets. Can you remember when department stores had personality, when shopping felt like an experience? You're a postal worker in 1975, carrying a leather mailbag weighing 30 pounds, walking the same route through neighborhoods where people knew you by name and invited you onto porches for iced tea. You're making $58,000 in today's dollars, with virtually guaranteed job security. Federal employment meant you'd have to commit serious crimes to get fired. You started before dawn sorting mail into wooden cubbies by address, bundling letters with rubber bands in delivery order, loading your bag, heading out for 6 hours of walking in all weather. You knew every house, knew who was on vacation so you could hold their mail, knew which dogs were friendly, knew the elderly widow lived for your daily visit because you might be her only conversation. You delivered handwritten letters that mattered, love letters, college acceptances, birthday cards from grandparents, bills needing paying, anticipated magazines. The mailbag dug into your shoulder, your feet ached by afternoon. But it was honest work with dignity. You had a pension waiting, health care costing almost nothing, enough vacation time to actually take your family somewhere yearly. Today's postal carrier makes about $51,000, a 12% pay cut in real terms, with increasing pressure as mail volume declines and management pushes routes to cover more ground with less staff. The mail is mostly advertisements and Amazon packages now. Did you last receive a letter that made you excited to open your mailbox? You're a drafting technician at an engineering firm in 1976, creating detailed technical drawings that turned concepts into buildable reality, working at a tilted drafting table with tools requiring steady hands and mathematical precision. You're making $62,000 in today's dollars, working where rows of drafting tables faced massive windows for natural light, the sound of pencils on vellum, conversation about tolerances and specifications, the zip of erasers removing mistakes. You used mechanical pencils with different lead hardness for different line weights, T-squares and triangles for perfectly straight lines and precise angles, compasses for circles, French curves for complex curves, templates with cutouts for standard shapes. Every line had meaning, solid lines for visible edges, dashed for hidden features, dimension lines with arrows showing exact measurements, notes specifying materials and finishes and assembly instructions. The drawings you produced became instructions that machinists and builders followed, and any error could result in parts that didn't fit or structures that failed. You worked closely with engineers, asked questions to clarify requirements, caught design problems before they became expensive mistakes. The vellum had a particular texture and smell. The lead left a slight shine. Finished drawings got rolled into tubes or filed in massive flat drawers. Today's drafting technician, now called a CAD operator, makes about $52,000 working on computers running software that automated much of what used to require skill and judgment. The profession has been de-skilled. Computers prevent many errors, automatically generate views from 3D models, standardize formatting. Many engineering tasks that used to require a drafting technician are now done by engineers themselves because software made it easy enough that specialists aren't needed. Can you imagine spending 8 hours drawing by hand with physical tools? You're an insurance adjuster in 1978, driving a company car to accident scenes and damaged properties, investigating claims, interviewing witnesses, taking photographs with film cameras requiring skill to use properly. You're pulling in $64,000 today's dollars, with full benefits and expense accounts covering meals when you traveled for major claims. You had authority to settle claims up to substantial amounts based on your investigation and judgment. If you determined a roof was hail damaged and the claim valid, you could write a $10,000 check on the spot. No approval needed from headquarters. The job required knowledge of construction, mechanics, weather patterns, human behavior, and insurance law. You could look at a crashed car and know whether damage matched the driver's story, could spot fraud by noticing inconsistencies between police reports and claimant descriptions, could assess storm damage, and distinguish between old deterioration and new destruction. Your decisions affected people's lives, whether they could rebuild after a fire, whether they'd be compensated fairly after an accident. You worked independently, managing your own schedule, sometimes driving hundreds of miles daily handling claims across your territory. Today's insurance adjuster makes about $52,000, has less authority to settle claims independently. Most decisions require approval from multiple management levels and software algorithms that flag claims for review, and increasingly works from photographs and video calls rather than visiting sites in person. Did you notice during your last insurance claim how little authority the adjuster seemed to have? How many times they said they'd have to check with their supervisor? You're a middle manager at a regional insurance company in 1975, overseeing 12 people, making decisions about claims, policies, and personnel affecting hundreds of customers. Your salary translates to $95,000 today. You have an actual office with a door that closes, a secretary managing your calendar and screening calls, calls, and an expense account for client lunches at steakhouses, where deals get made over martinis and prime rib. You studied business or liberal arts in college. Just having a bachelor's degree in anything qualified you for management track. And you worked your way up from the mailroom over 5 or 6 years. Your day involves meetings, reviewing paper files, making phone calls, dictating memos to your secretary, walking the floor to check on your team. You make judgment calls based on experience and company guidelines, approve claims up to certain amounts without needing higher authorization, hire and fire based on your assessment of character and work ethic. The job comes with power and respect. You're Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so, never your first name. You belong to the Rotary Club. Play golf with other middle managers on I. Wednesdays are being groomed for vice president if you stay loyal and perform. The company invested in you because they expected you'd stay 20 or 30 years, retire with a gold watch and a pension paying 70% of your final salary. Today's middle manager, if they exist at all in flattened corporate structures, makes about $65,000, manages twice as many people with half the authority, gets excluded from decision-making happening at higher levels, and lives in constant fear of the next restructuring that might eliminate their position to improve quarterly earnings. How many layers of management stood between you and the CEO at your last job? And did any seem to have real power? You're a bookkeeper for a medium-sized company in 1978, managing financial records that kept the business running, working with ledger books 3 feet wide and adding machine printing on paper tape, filing cabinets full of invoices and receipts and bank statements. You're making $57,000 in today's dollars, with responsibility for accounts payable, accounts receivable, payroll, bank reconciliation, financial reports the owner relied on for business decisions. You posted transactions by hand to ledger accounts, columns of numbers written in ink with perfect penmanship because messy records led to errors taking days to find. You used an adding machine requiring skill to operate efficiently, your fingers dancing across number keys, pulling the lever to print subtotals and totals, checking your work by adding columns in reverse. You prepared paychecks by calculating hours worked, gross pay, deductions for taxes and insurance and retirement. You knew the company's finances intimately, which customers paid on time and which needed reminders, which vendors offered the best terms, when cash flow was tight and when the business was flush. You caught discrepancies between bank statements and company records, investigated missing invoices, advised the owner about tax implications of business decisions. Today's bookkeeper makes about $42,000, and much of the profession has been automated by software like QuickBooks that handles calculations automatically, imports bank transactions electronically, generates reports with a click. Many small businesses now have bookkeeping done by part-time contractors or use online services where your financial data gets processed by someone you've never met in another state or country. When did you last think about who handles your company's books? You're an auto mechanic at a dealership in 1973, diagnosing and repairing cars that were mechanical rather than computerized, where problems revealed themselves through sounds and smells and your experienced hands feeling for issues. You're making $63,000 in today's dollars, with factory training the manufacturer paid for, tool allowances helping you build your collection of specialized equipment, and flat rate pay that rewarded efficiency and skill. You worked in a service bay smelling like motor oil and gasoline and brake fluid, radio playing rock stations, fans pushing hot air around in summer, space heaters glowing in winter. Cars were simpler but required more maintenance, tune-ups every 6 months, oil changes every 3,000 miles, carburetors needing constant adjustment, ignition points that wore out. You could rebuild an engine in a weekend, diagnose problems by sound while test driving, perform repairs requiring skill and knowledge rather than just replacing modules. You had regular customers who requested you specifically, who trusted your recommendations about what needed fixing now versus what could wait. The dealership valued experienced mechanics because customers returned to places where they felt taken care of. Today's auto mechanic makes about $44,000 on average, and the job has changed completely. Modern cars require expensive diagnostic computers to identify problems. Repairs increasingly mean replacing entire assemblies rather than fixing individual components. And flat rate pay now works against mechanics because manufacturers set labor times assuming everything goes perfectly. When did you last feel confident that your mechanic actually understood what was wrong with your car? You're a production assistant at a television studio in 1976, the entry-level position everyone said could lead anywhere if you worked hard. You're making $49,000 in today's dollars, enough to rent a decent apartment and save money because you knew this was your foot in the door. You arrived at 5 a.m. to prep for morning broadcasts, checking equipment, organizing scripts, running errands for producers and directors, but also learning how every piece of the operation worked. You coiled cables, loaded film reels, held cue cards, managed props, coordinated with the control room, escorted guests to green rooms, listened to every every conversation because you understood you were getting a masterclass just by being present. The studio smelled like hot lights and electrical equipment, makeup and hairspray, canvas flats for sets. You worked 12-hour days regularly, stayed late when shoots ran long, came in on weekends for special broadcasts, and nobody complained because this was the path. People who started as production assistants in the 70s went on to produce sitcoms, direct movies, run entire networks. There was a clear ladder everyone had climbed. Today's production assistant makes about $31,000, usually as a freelancer without benefits, working gig to gig with no job security, and the path to advancement has mostly disappeared because the industry consolidated, because reality TV replaced scripted programming requiring large crews, because streaming services produce less content with smaller budgets. How many stories have you heard about entertainment workers who can't afford to eat properly, who sleep in their cars between gigs? You're a railroad conductor in 1974, working for a freight company moving cargo across the country, living a life split between home and the rails, making $82,000 in today's money. You wore a uniform that marked you as someone important. Pressed shirt, tie, vest with a pocket watch, cap with company insignia, all provided by the railroad. Your job was managing the train, supervising the crew, ensuring cargo was loaded and unloaded correctly, communicating with dispatch via radio, monitoring schedules, watching for track problems, coordinating with engineers. You spent 3 days on a route, slept in railroad hotels or in the caboose, ate at diners in towns along the line, then had 4 days home with your family. The work was serious. You were responsible for millions of dollars worth of cargo, sometimes hazardous materials, always working around equipment that could kill you if you made a mistake. You walked the length of freight trains in all-weather checking connections between cars, climbed ladders on moving cars to reach the caboose, signaled to engineers with lanterns at night when radio failed. The railroad provided everything: your uniform, your training, your pension that would pay 75% of your final salary for life after 30 years of service. You belonged to a powerful union that protected your wages and working conditions, that ensured you got paid overtime and hazard pay and meal allowances. Today's railroad conductor makes about $61,000, which represents a significant real wage cut, and the job is constantly threatened by railroad companies pushing for single-person crews, eliminating the conductor position entirely and leaving just the engineer alone in the locomotive. The caboose disappeared decades ago, replaced by electronic monitoring systems. The pension system collapsed or got converted to 401k plans that shift all the risk onto workers. Can you remember the last time you saw a freight train and thought about the people working on it? You're a medical technologist in a hospital laboratory in 1977, analyzing blood samples and cultures and tissue specimens, operating equipment that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, making diagnoses that doctors depended on to treat patients. You're earning $66,000 in today's dollars, working in a quiet, climate-controlled lab that felt like a sanctuary compared to the chaos of hospital floors above you. You wore a white lab coat, safety goggles when handling certain chemicals, gloves you changed constantly to avoid contamination. Your workday involved looking through microscopes, identifying bacteria and parasites in abnormal cells, running tests on machines requiring careful calibration, recording results in ledgers before calling doctors with critical findings. You could identify diseases by sight, the particular shape of cells in leukemia, the pattern bacteria made in cultures, the color changes in chemical reactions indicating diabetes or liver failure. The job required a bachelor's degree in medical technology, a year of clinical training, and certification exams. But once you had those credentials, you were set. Hospitals competed for skilled lab techs, offering signing bonuses and guaranteed raises and shift differentials if you worked nights. Today's medical technologist makes about $54,000 despite requiring the same education and certification. And many hospitals have cut lab staff, consolidated testing to reference laboratories in other states, automated tests that used to require human analysis. How much do you think about who analyzes your blood work when your doctor orders tests? You're a commercial artist in 1975, working at an advertising agency or design studio, creating illustrations and layouts, and lettering by hand with tools that required years to master: ruling pens, brushes, airbrushes, X-Acto knives, T-squares, triangles, French curves. You're making $73,000 in today's dollars, with a portfolio that could land you even higher paying jobs if you wanted to move to New York or Los Angeles. Your desk looked like organized chaos: jars of rubber cement, bottles of ink in 20 colors, paper scraps, photographs for reference, sketches in various stages, coffee cups stained with paint. You created everything from scratch. A client wanted a magazine ad, you drew the illustration, specified the typeface, hand-lettered the headlines, created the entire layout on artboard with everything precisely positioned, then sent it to a typesetter and printer who would produce the final version. You used technical skills that took years to develop. Perfect perspective drawing, color theory applied practically, typography with attention to kerning and leading, composition that directed the viewer's eye exactly where you wanted. The studio smelled like rubber cement and paint thinner and paper. The radio played in the background, and there was camaraderie among artists who understood the specific challenges of commercial work versus fine art. Today's graphic designer makes about $47,000 on average, working primarily on computers with software that democratize design to the point where businesses think anyone with a laptop can do it. The profession has been devalued because clients don't understand that good design is more than knowing Photoshop, because websites like Fiverr connect them with designers overseas charging $20 for a logo, because AI is now generating images that might replace even low-level design work. When was the last time you paid for design work and felt good about what you paid? You're a union electrician in 1978, installing and repairing electrical systems in commercial buildings and industrial facilities, reading schematics as easily as most people read newspapers, understanding electrical theory well enough to troubleshoot problems that baffled building engineers. You're making $76,000 in modern currency, with full benefits, annuity fund contributions, and guaranteed wage increases built into your union contract. You completed a 4-year apprenticeship where you were paid to learn, starting at 50% of journeyman wages and increasing each year until you tested for your license. You carry tools that cost thousands of dollars. Klein pliers passed down from your father, who was also a union electrician, a voltage tester you trust with. Your life, wire strippers worn smooth from decades of use. The work requires intelligence and physical skill, calculating voltage drops and amperage loads, bending conduit to perfect angles, pulling wire through ceiling spaces in summer heat that reaches 120 degrees, troubleshooting circuits where one wrong move could kill you. You wire hospitals where backup generators have to work perfectly during emergencies, factories where production depends on your installation staying operational, office buildings where thousands of people work under lights you installed. Today's non-union electrician makes about $52,000 on average, and union electricians make more but face declining membership and political attacks on unions themselves. The profession still requires the same skills and danger, but society values it less, treats it as fallback work rather than skilled craft. Have you noticed how people react when you mention trade work? That subtle condescension that suggests you couldn't do anything better? You're an executive secretary in 1976, a position that required intelligence and discretion and organizational skills that executives depended on absolutely. You're earning $54,000 in today's dollars, with benefits and respect, and a career path that could lead to office manager or even executive positions if you were ambitious and capable. You managed your executive's entire professional life, scheduled every meeting, screened every call, filtered every request for their time, drafted correspondence, took dictation in shorthand at 100 words per minute, managed confidential files, coordinated travel arrangements, handled expense reports, interfaced with clients and other executives. You knew more about your boss's business than most of the managers reporting to them because everything crossed your desk first. You dressed professionally in outfits you bought from better department stores, kept your hair perfect, wore sensible but stylish shoes because you were the first person visitors saw, the voice people heard when they called. The job required multitasking before that word existed, typing a letter while answering phones, while managing someone at your desk, while remembering that your boss needed to leave at 3 for an appointment. You used a Rolodex with hundreds of business cards meticulously organized, a desk calendar where you tracked deadlines and commitments, filing systems you developed yourself. You had authority to make certain decisions on your executive's behalf, spending limits for supplies and services, the power to tell even vice presidents that your boss was unavailable. Today's executive assistant makes about $52,000, which sounds comparable until you factor in inflation. It's actually a 20% pay cut, and the position has lost status and authority as executives increasingly manage their own calendars and emails. Did you notice that we stopped calling them secretaries and started calling them assistants right around the time the pay and respect declined? You're a quality control inspector at a manufacturing plant in 1975, the person who stood between the production line and the customer, who had the authority to reject entire batches if they didn't meet specifications. You're earning $61,000 in modern currency, wearing a lab coat and carrying calibrated measuring instruments, walking the factory floor with authority that came from expertise rather than position in the hierarchy. You checked dimensions with micrometers and calipers, verified hardness with specialized testers, examined welds for defects, tested electrical components, reviewed documentation to ensure everything was traceable. You had the power to stop production if you found a systemic problem, could quarantine suspect material, required rework of defective items. Production managers sometimes pressured you to let marginal parts through, but you answered to the quality manager who backed your decisions because recalls and warranty claims cost far more than scrapping bad parts. Today's quality inspector makes about $44,000 on average, and the profession has been decimated by automation, computer vision systems that check parts faster than humans, statistical process control that catches problems earlier, offshore manufacturing where quality standards are lower and inspectors have less authority. Have you noticed how products seem cheaper and less durable than they used to be? How things break faster and work worse? You're standing here now, listening to these stories about jobs that used to mean something, that paid enough to build a life on, that came with dignity and respect, and the promise that hard work would be rewarded fairly. Some disappeared entirely, replaced by technology that made them obsolete. Others still exist, but pay a fraction of what they used to in real terms, stripped of the benefits and security that made them real careers. The pattern repeats across all 25. Work that was valued became work that was merely tolerated, then work that was actively devalued. The travel agent who knew the world became unnecessary when you could book flights on your phone. The telephone operator who connected you became obsolete when computers could route calls automatically. The machinist who made precision parts got undercut by factories in countries where workers earned dollars per day. The journalist who investigated corruption got laid off when newspapers couldn't compete with free content online. We tell ourselves this is progress, that automation and efficiency and global competition benefit everyone. But walk through any city and count the people working multiple gigs to survive. The college graduates living with roommates in their 30s. The families who can't afford homes in neighborhoods their grandparents bought into on single union incomes. The wealth didn't disappear. It just stopped flowing to the people who create it through their labor. These 25 jobs represent hundreds of thousands of people whose work mattered, who contributed to society, who deserved better than watching their professions get gutted while being told they should have learned to code or gotten different degrees or adapted faster. Maybe it's time we stopped pretending this outcome was inevitable and started asking whether an economy that doesn't reward work is actually working for anyone except the people at the very top. What's your story? Did your parents or grandparents work one of these jobs? Did they tell you about buying their first house on a single income? About pensions that actually lasted through retirement? Drop your memories in the comments because these stories matter. They remind us that the economy we have now isn't the only one possible, that we built something different before and could choose to build it again. Hit that like button if this reminded you of what we lost, and subscribe because we're gonna keep telling these stories. Keep remembering when work was worth something. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next one.